So sitting next to you, or sitting behind you, or front, so sitting next to you, you might be sitting next to a black devil.
It states in Psalms chapter 82, verse 6, I have said ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High.
Right Knowledge Radio. All right, this is Right Knowledge Radio, where everything Nuwabian will be spoken about, especially information, academics, things of that nature. Today is November 15th, 2022, the fourth month of Shu, 13th day, Nunam Year, the third week in the year 82 of the Nuwabian time. We're going to continue reading the Algonquin section of the book called The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by David Imhotep, PhD. All right, so without further ado, let's get into that. Where are we? Okay. So actually last time, let's recap real quick. Last time, we read about the Klamath River woman giving a recount of her memory of what her past ancestors told her. Right? So let me reread that. We carried the memory of the far north, the huge icebergs, the splendors of the aurora borealis flickered across the snowy fields. In this land of the frozen north, some of our people were left. The Eskimo, they were given a different language as they were separated from our sturdy band across the snowy fields, and have long since from this time on inhabited the land of the perpetual snow. Now she also mentions that as they traveled from Africa to Europe, and then over to the Americas, that some of their people stayed in some of these settlements when they were hopping from nation to nation, traveling from nation to nation. Some of the people stayed behind and just settled there. They liked the area, or I don't know what the circumstances were, but some of the Algonquin people settled there and just remained there, right? Now the brother David Imhotep talks about Virginia, and they have a theory called the Clovis people, which are the Asian Indians. How far does that go back? This is just a quick recap. The Clovis people, 9400 BC, but recently the Virginia Department of Historic Resources revealed in their literature that the American Indians were in Virginia at least 16,000 years ago. So 9400 BC is not even close to 16,000 years ago. Who were those people 16,000 years ago? Now the author says that the Khoisan people who traveled from land to land, and the Khoisan people were from Nubia, which you guys would call Africa. So we're all connected. When the master teacher was connecting us all, that's what he was doing. He was connecting us all, because not only did we travel the planet, we were already here when the continents broke. Right? So let's continue on with this reading, man. It's very important that we pay attention to this. During the brief Ice Age interstitial warming period experienced in Europe circa 40,000 years ago, the Khoisan entered many European landscapes. Some of these were inevitably valleys. One of these valleys could easily have been the Yurok Valley. After another long journey to Yurok, specifically stated, they ended their journey at the furthermost southern border of South America. That area is none other than Tierra del Fuego. The Fuegians from South America, Khoisan people of sub-Saharan Africa. Fuegians of South America still share the same M174 and D haploid groups as the African Khoisan. This is the third hint of the Yurok's African heritage. If all of these are but coincidences, they are most assuredly remarkable coincidences. You have witnessed not one or two, but three separate sacred traditions from three entirely different native groups: the Algonquin, the South, the Yurok, whose people once lived on opposite sides of North America. These stories, handed down from generation to generation, say their people did not originate in the Americas. More of these stories will probably surface as time goes on. So very interesting. You got three, I guess they're calling them Native American groups, that say they ain't from North America. And I can infer that the other groups, especially the Asians, because the Asians, they can't go back that far in their history. They can't go back that far. They'll talk about their ancestors, but they don't really give specifics on their ancestors. They don't know where the language came from. That's because it came from 9 ether people, right? And some of these Asians are actually racist toward the people who gave them their culture here on this part of the planet. So that's why, for the most part, I'm not a hateful person, but I really don't rock with them because they stole our culture and then deny the people who originated their culture and don't want to break bread with them. You know what I mean? Like the Cherokee Nation. If you look at the Cherokee Nation, I mean, they're basically Caucasians. I mean, if you really look, you know, they're really Caucasian. So it's really interesting to look at how the devil works. Same thing going on with this Jewish thing, right? That they don't want you to claim that you're the original when the Moors are the original. You know, Hebrew Israelites or Israelites. Well, Hebrew just means you're a foreigner. It means you crossed over the river. Hebrew, right? And Phoenician when they saw him crossing. So anyway, I don't want to get too far off track here, but that's very interesting. Okay, let's continue, because I will go off on a tangent here. You know what I'm saying? From a study of the word Algonquin, we see the area where they first most likely appeared. The word Algonquin means at the place of spearing fishes and eels, and is also used in reference to a geographical area, which lies in the upper northeastern corner of the United States and across the border into Canada. Again, as mentioned earlier, we see further evidence the Algonquin were first concentrated in the northeastern United States and southern and southeastern Canada. They either sailed straight across the Atlantic or skipped from island to island as the Vikings would later do. This is the same time period and area that the Skraelings occupied. Speaking of the Algonquins, a genealogical article says, in Labrador, just north of New England, we see that they came into contact with the Eskimo. The Skraelings were also the very first Eskimos. Could the Skraelings have also been the first Algonquin Indians, just as the Skraelings were the first Eskimos? Ancient so-called pygmy skulls have been found as far south as Holliston Mills in eastern Tennessee, Algonquin territory. There's a figure, you can look at the skull here in the book. These types, though still living in East Tennessee as late as the first millennium BC, range back in time to at least 40,000 years BP. Don't know what BP means. It would be convenient to believe this statement, but it is not entirely correct. Although my thesis is that they were short Africans, the Pygmy, the Twa, the Anu, the Tahites. These were short Africans predating the Algonquin in the Americas by thousands of years. There were most likely no people possessing brachycephalic skulls in the Americas 40,000 years ago. The reason for this is that the brachycephalic skull trait did not appear on this planet until after 10,000 years ago. These short African Khoisan predated the Algonquin in the Americas. The Algonquin later spread out and became the most heavily populated and widespread of all North American Paleo-Indians, originally containing few tribes. Today's history books say the Algonquin were not necessarily related by blood, but they all spoke the Algonquin language. What, it says in parentheses, what is that statement based on? This author has never seen any study to that effect. The Algonquin speakers covered an extremely large area ranging from Quebec, Canada, and the Carolinas of North America, west to the Rocky Mountains as stated earlier. The wide linguistic distribution of Algonquin speakers suggests a very ancient past. It seems that after spreading out and settling down for good, it was most likely that the Algonquin tribes were mainly sedentary and agricultural, probably the only exceptions being those of the cold regions of Canada and the Siksika of the plains. There is, however, no evidence of the first Algonquin speakers being African at this point. On the other hand, the VDHR does have evidence of natives in the Virginia 16,000 years ago, as mentioned earlier. There is evidence that 12,393 years later, in 1607, Captain John Smith, who built the first permanent settlement in Virginia, reported being captured by black Indians. Okay, so there it is right there, black Indians, Moorish Indians, all right? To him, it looked like black people maybe from Africa, or very similar traits. Now, I always said that we are similar. We are the same race, we're just in different parts of the planet. Not because of the slave trade, because if we were here at least 16,000 years in Virginia, there wasn't no slave trade back then, right? So let's continue. We have established that there was no larger continuous migration across the Beringia, if any, between 115,000 to 10,000 BC because of the giant icebergs in the way during the last ice age. So the VDHR's report is evidence that natives in Virginia most likely did not migrate across Beringia. That's not a fact. That's just most likely. So that's called a theory, right? They, even the brother is falling victim to theories. Hence, the natives in Virginia 16,000 years ago could not have been Mongolian, right? He's saying they couldn't have been Mongolian. Now, why is the brother saying that, right? He says, why not? As mentioned earlier, skeletal evidence illustrates that the Mongolians did not enter the Americas until the middle Holocene, which is 3000 BC. All right, so they've come up with what they think is a fact, right? Saying that the Mongolian, which means Asian, right? We say Asian. The Asian didn't come over here till 3000 BC. So who were these people who came at least 16,000 years ago? 13,000 years before the Asian came, right? 13,000 years. You Moors, you black people, you Negroes, you colored folk, you were here. You were here. All right. Now this is before the whole Hebrew Israelite thing. Our Algonquin people existed before Hebrew Israelites. You know, no disrespect to the Hebrew Israelites, but the Hebrew Israelites migrated out of, they're captured by Babylon. They actually migrated out of ancient Egypt. That's why their ancient stories are so tied in with ancient Egypt, right? Jacob, Esau, Joseph, and Yeshua all came out of ancient Egypt. Okay. But our people, right, being descendants of Turtle Island, indigenous to Turtle Island, were here before all that started. Before all that Bible stuff started, we already existed, so we got tales to tell. You know what I mean? So we're not done telling our story. We're not done telling our story over here. Right? Okay, that was just my commentary and rant. Now, where was I? Okay. It is highly probable the VDHR Algonquin in Virginia 16,000 years ago were most likely Africans or Moors. I would say Moors. Interestingly, in 1607, Captain John Smith reported he was captured by black Indians. Just 74 years later, an interesting remark was made about the color of the Indians of New England. For the reader's preference, this is in parentheses, for the reader's reference, William Penn founded the province of Pennsylvania in North America for the British. Penn made an interesting remark that has been recorded in history. He says, in 1681, the Indians of New England, or Moors, as they were also styled, called by the settlers, were pronounced by William Penn to be as black as gypsies. See Mr. Eagleston's article in the Century magazine of May 1883. This statement of Penn may even mean that the British gypsies of 1681 were quite black. Penn was not alone. Other Englishmen who had colonized the western shores of the Atlantic spoke of the Indians there being as dark as gypsies. Heavily melanated people, okay? Just to be sure that the color of the gypsies, Penn was referring to New England who were black and of African descent. Doesn't necessarily mean they're African descent. That's an assumption by the author here, right? He's using African either as a race or a regional reference, because if a Caucasian moves to South Africa and he has kids that are born there, those kids are also African. South African, to be more specific. So African is not a race. But when you can't say these Caucasian, you can't say they're Moors because they're of the wrong genetics and the wrong race to be a Moor. A Moor is a nine-ether, melanated, woolly-haired being. And in some cases, some Moors have straight black hair. My grandmama did, so, and she was Aniawea, she was a Cherokee. Extremely dark, like blue-black dark, my grandmama was. So, and she had straight hair, natural straight hair, but she's still a nine-ether being. Okay, let me not lose my place here, y'all. Okay, just to be sure, I'm gonna reread this section, just to be sure that the color of the gypsies Penn was referring to, New England too, were black and of African descent. Here is more evidence to make his meaning crystal. Further, this savage and the Galloway gypsy and the Irish rebels described by Derrick as Siuthach, or men with plaited hair, and the last two are known as men of swarthy skin. Swarthy, meaning melanated. meaning darker than brown skin, more melanated than brown skin. That's what swarthy is. Some of your Arabs, some of the Moorish Arabs were also called swarthy skinned. Okay. Scientists believe the migrations into the Americas consisted of two distinctly different groups of peoples: the Paleo-Americans in pre-glacial times, and much later the Mongoloids, the Asians, in the post-glacial times. The Paleo-American African skulls were long and narrow. Let's see if I can. Dolichocephalic. Yeah, Dolichocephalic, and had delicate features, whereas the Mongolian skulls were round, brachycephalic, and had rugged features. The jaws of the Paleo-Americans protrude forward, being prognathous, identical to African jaws, whereas the Mongolian jaws do not protrude forward. Do not forget the fine example of a 40,000-year-old prognathous scraling jaw and skull that was found in East Tennessee and was posted on the internet by the University of California Riverside faculty. Stop. All right, let's take a moment to pause and reflect on what was just spoken. All right, the Paleo-American, meaning that's the first. They're saying that's the first American that there were Moors, right? And going back to the last audio on this, that goes back at least 60,000 years ago. Now they're finding out, the Virginia Department of Human Resources, they're saying at least 16,000 years ago, we were here. The author's tying it in. We were here, right? The brother David Imhotep. And I love that fact. And there's also a mention of the prognathous scraling jaw. Now, the scraling people, I haven't read that in this book yet. Maybe that'll be the next section we go over in this book. You know, I love bringing you guys the information. You know, this is Right Knowledge Radio, so we're going to bring you the right knowledge. We ain't going to bring you no wrong knowledge that hasn't been thoroughly investigated and researched, right? Now, the Skraeling people were the first people of Scandinavia, where the Vikings come from, right? And we're going to get into that. So when he says Skraelings, he really means the Twa people out of Africa who migrated into Europe, right? Because the Caucasian hadn't been invented yet. So we were the first people in Europe. There's also a book by Ivan van Sertima that talks about the first Europeans were Moors, right? So there's all of it's coming together now, y'all. We are living in a day and time where you have to choose sides, right? The Quran talks about al-diyani al-tanad, right? The day that the names are going to be called out, right? These are the days that the names will be called out. Brother Kyrie Irving, you know what I'm saying? And Brother Kanye West are not afraid, you know what I'm saying? I'm not afraid either. I support those brothers, man. Right Knowledge Radio supports those brothers. If I could get them on the show one day, I will, but we're taking baby steps right now, so I don't want to bite off more than we can chew. Inshallah. So this is very interesting information. This is why when I read this whole book, I got to speak to the people about this. Got to speak to the Nuwabians about this, because we need to keep dropping knowledge. You know, we keep doing and performing the Wabu and practicing the Wabu, right knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding, which leads to sound right reasoning. This is what we're going through right now in our revolution as beings, as nine-ether beings. So let's continue reading and soaking up this knowledge and absorbing, and stop using the terms Negro, Black, and colored. Those are slave labels. I'm gonna pound that into your head when you listen to me speak. All right, let's keep going. If Americans migrated to the Americas from Asia, as we were told, and were unmixed since their arrival, Why would they not look like their Asian relatives of today? The so-called full-blooded Americans are said to have a reddish-brown skin tone, darker than the Mongolian Asians. They are referred to as Redskins today. The football franchise in Washington, D.C. named their professional football team after them, which furthers my point. They were not referred to as Yellowskins as Mongolian Asians who are of lighter complexion. They also do not have the round, brachycephalic heads of their Asian ancestors. Their heads are long and narrow, dolichocephalic as Africans. Close your eyes and bring both images into focus. They are different looking than the Asians, are they not? This is due to the fact that they are of a mixed heritage of African and Mongolian. So he's calling mixed Moorish and Asian Americans. He's saying Americans. He's calling them Americans, right? Because if we came at least 57,000 years before the Asians came, then who has a stronger claim to the land? You know, who got a stronger claim to the land? We do. That's why when Dr. York, the Isles of Patmos, he talks about the archaeological evidence points that we, meaning Moorish peoples, 9 ether beings, who they're mislabeling as black, were the first beings to be here. Now we're going way back, because the further you go back, it's to our advantage to go way back, way before they even existed. So they can have a historian, but their people didn't live, so they only have so much credibility. It's up to you to speak the word of your ancestors. They didn't even exist back then. They have no claim. All they can do is lie at this point. I'm not saying all of them lie, because some of them tell the truth. You know, some of these Canaanite Caucasians do tell the truth, so it's important to study their works too. But definitely do not get all of your source material from Caucasians, right? You need to speak to your own people. I see some YouTubers getting all their information, even though it's about them, they're getting it from Canaanites, and that's not, I don't consider that correct. Some of it, you can't get all your information from them. That would be incorrect. That's like going to the enemy to tell you the truth. He's not going to relinquish his power to tell you the truth. That's ridiculous. So let's keep going. From Christopher Columbus, we have an eyewitness account of what the natives looked like when he arrived in 1492 southeast of North America. They all go naked as their mothers bore them. They were very well built, with very handsome bodies and very good faces. Their hair is coarse, almost like the hairs of a horse's tail, and short. They wear their hair down over their eyebrows, except for a few strands behind, which they wear long and never cut. Some of them are painted black, and they are the color of the people in the Canaries, neither black nor white. Some of them are painted white, and some red, and some in any color they can find. Let's see. A hypothetical but a logical question arises here. When Christopher Columbus landed in West Indies, he thought he had landed in India because the people he saw there were brown-skinned. Is this not how the Americans received the name he first called them, Indians, which was copied by everyone even today? So that's why I don't like using the term Indian, because he thought he was in India, right? You know, Peter de Moor, Peter de Negro brought him here, right? Because Columbus was a horrible navigator. He didn't know where he was going. He just heard the stories that the Moors had told him about a distant land, right? Going back to Cancan, Mansa Musa, you know, out of Mali, of the great Malian Empire, the richest man on the planet back then, right? So they heard stories. That's how he found out, and the Moor brought him over here. All right, they'll try to write that out of history, because history, from their point of view, is very lopsided and just hateful. They don't even want us to be part of it, but that's inevitable that we're part of it because we're the ones that gave them the knowledge. Okay, so let's keep reading. When he first arrived in the Western Hemisphere, Columbus probably thought that he had discovered India because the people were brown-skinned, the color of Carib, where they get the name Caribbean Island. However, something is not right here. The educational system has taught us that the first Americans came from Asia, specifically Mongolia, which is north of China, and currently they most certainly do not have brown or black skin. I don't think anybody has black skin, but if Columbus landed in the West Indies and saw yellowish red-skinned people, as we see the Americans today on television, would he not have thought he landed in Mongolia or China? When he landed, however, he saw brown-skinned people and thought he was in India. This is likely why he called them Indians. Another clue as to the color of these natives when the Spanish came is the Carib. The name Carib Indians also refers to the Taínos. Another clue as to the color of these natives when the Spanish came is the Carib name of the Carib Indians. Caro, powder, has a brown color. Does it not make sense that when the Spanish first saw these people, they called them the color of their skin? Accordingly, this may have been how the Caribbean Sea attained its name. The peoples who frequented the Caribbean Sea were seen everywhere. The Spanish sailed and were brown colored. After reading the last few paragraphs, considering the evidence applying inductive reasoning, one would have to say that the color of the first people Columbus saw had brown, colored East Indian skin tones, not yellowish red skin tones. To close this issue, the evidence of the pre-Clovis, before 9400 BC, occupation of the Americans by non-Mongolian Paleo-American Africans is overwhelming. Overwhelming, right? So I think we can pretty much close the case on who the first Americans were. They're Moors. But this book just kind of touches on the evidence. There's more evidence being discovered every day. I know on the internet they found a skull, I think it's in Brazil, that went back, I think it was like 100,000 years ago, and it said it was a Negroid. So there's a lot of evidence, man, that we were here, you know. So very interesting. I'm glad I was able to bring this information. We're gonna go ahead and close out the show. You know what I mean? I like the information that's coming out these days. You know what I mean? It's gonna bring us back into the fold and strengthen our nation, the United Nuwabian Nation of Moors, as we tell people who they are and feel comfortable being who they are and expressing who they are to the world. Everybody else has a culture that they're proud of. Maybe not the American Caucasian, because they basically just emulate. Their whole existence is an emulation of us, cowboys. There was no cowboys in Europe before they seen us. They weren't wearing moccasins. They weren't even wearing hats, the cowboy hats. You know what I mean? They got that from Mexico, right? So they emulate even Mohawks. We had Mohawks, right? So everything they got from us, except their savagery and killing. That they got that from the devil. Yeah, they got that from the devil. They didn't get that from us. We taught them how to farm, taught them how to survive over here, and look what they did. You know what I mean? But knowledge of self will help us get that back. So let's end this show. Right Knowledge Radio. This is your host, Mudhuta Hedokayu. Hope you have a beautiful day. Stay Nuwabian. Use Nuwabic. Practice Nuwabic. study, study, study. Wadu.
you.